Welcome in everyone to a very special episode of American Joyride. I am honored and privileged to be joined today by Melvyn Downes, a former member of the SAS, and we have a lot to talk about. Thank you, Melvyn, for being here right off the start.
Thanks, Davey, for having me. It's great to be speaking to you and all the people over in the across the pond in the USA.
So, like we were just talking about before we started rolling, you're the second member of the SAS, second member from across the pond, if you will, who's ever appeared on this show. So, I think it's really neat that we're broadening the horizons to not just American people. We're going international. We're going to other countries. We're learning as much as we can. So, I want to start kind of right at the jump. How did you find yourself in the military? And can you explain how it works in the UK? Because you've got a lot of different areas. It's not like the US. How does that work over there?
Well, I joined at 16 years old, but prior to this, I always wanted to go in the military from as young as I could think of. My mom said I was 3 years old and I was just fascinated with the military all the time. So I joined something like the Army Cadets, which was 11 years old, which is a bit like the Scouts, but they concentrate more on the military type of events, and they fire weapons and all stuff like this. Because at school, I wasn't academic because I didn't see the point really so much in school. I just always wanted to get out there, get out in the field and, do things like navigation, map reading, first aid. To me, that was what I found I enjoyed, not just learning geography and geology and stuff like that. So I always had a fascination about joining the military. And so as soon as I could, at 16, 2 weeks after leaving school, I was straight in the boy soldiers. Now, the boy soldiers, it's infantry junior leaders. You spend a year basic training. So if you joined as an adult at 18, you'd spend 18 months training, but we spent a full year. So you got, you was even more proficient at your job. And then you go to your parent unit, which my first unit was an infantry unit. So I went to them, which was the Staffordshire Regiment. It's a bit different than how you do it in America. But at the time, we used to have infantry regiments were basically from around the areas where you were from. So if you joined your local infantry regiment, I knew people from across the road, and it was around, I was from Stoke-on-Trent, but there's people from Birmingham and the Midlands, and then another regiment would be sort of based in London and so on. So it was sort of a pals regiment. They've lost that a bit nowadays, but that's how it used to be, which obviously is a good thing, but from the First World War, it was a bad thing because if suddenly there's a war and that unit goes there, you can lose like a lot of people from the one city or town. So that's why, in ways, sometimes they don't like it. So I joined an infantry regiment. And then from there, after 12 years of being in the infantry, I was a sergeant. So I was used to leadership. And after you get to the rank of a sergeant in the British military, then you start going to more down to the desk side of things. And there's the sergeant major and so on. And I wasn't ready for that. I always wanted to go for, if you're going to go for something, go for the best. And I heard about the special forces, and that's why I ended up going for it. And luckily I got in.
And I can't wait to get into that. But before you were in the SAS, you ended up deploying to the Gulf War with your infantry unit. Is that correct?
Yeah. And prior to that, I already had 3 operational tours of Northern Ireland, which, even though it was part of Great Britain at the time, it was called the Troubles. It was really hectic and dangerous, and it was really confusing. It was a bit like how an insurgency is nowadays. You didn't know who the enemy were, you know. You'd be crossing the street in one area, they'd like you, then you cross over and they'd hate you. They wouldn't, they'd be throwing bottles at you or trying to blow you up with IDs. So unfortunately, that was the first time I saw any combat experience. And
Well,
go on.
yeah, so actually that's fascinating because in the US, obviously the US military, other than in very, very specific situations, specifically Delta Force, things like that, they don't operate within the US. We have the National Guard, but like regular military, the Possum Comitatus Act, which I'm sure I just butchered, but that's not how it sounds like. So when things were going on with the IRA and Ireland and the bombings and things, they actually deployed regular full-blown UK troops to the streets. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, because the police couldn't cope with it. So we had the British Army, and it's part of Great Britain, Northern Ireland. So we was over there policing, but we're policing everybody because there was a lot of tension, especially it's religious. That's what lots of wars are caused by. But it was sectarianism. It was the Catholics against the Protestants. And I still don't really understand it now. All I know is that, it was mainly the Catholics who wanted to be part of Southern Ireland, and the Protestants, they wanted to remain part of Great Britain because it's Northern Ireland. And we were there as a neutral. You just try and keep the peace, stop each side, the terrorist parts of them, trying to kill each other and kill innocent civilians. But obviously, because of the Protestants, they were more loyal to well, it was the Queen at the time, one majority of them were. They backed the military more. But there was terrorist organizations within the Protestant side was just as bad as the terrorist organizations within the Catholic side, But it was mainly the Catholics who would say want to leave the UK and be part of Southern Ireland. Not all of them, but that's the basic way how you see it. And there was a lot of infighting. So we was there to try and stop this infighting. But then we were seen, especially by a large majority of the Catholic side, as being the enemy, even though we were there trying to look after both sides. So it was really confusing because obviously when you go to a Protestant area, they come around and give you cups of tea and they sort of like you and you feel safer. Then you go to a Catholic area and you could tell by the tensions they didn't like you, they didn't want you there. They weren't all terrorists, and we was there trying to look after them as well. So that's how it was. And it was confusing at the beginning when I first went. My first tour was 1984 as a 19 and 20-year-old as a private. So I didn't understand what was going on. And within a few weeks of being out there, got a good friend of mine got killed and blown up. And then you realize, wow, this is for real. And then the second time was something like 5 years later. I was a corporal in charge of 8 blokes, and a bit more about what's happening. And then the third time I went was in 1992. And this time, just before going to the Special Forces, I was a sergeant in charge of a platoon, off platoon, because how it worked, the full platoon of 30 guys, you'd split up. The young lieutenant, you say lieutenant, we say lieutenants, he'd take 15 guys and I'd take the other 15. And I'd spend 6 months with them and he'd spend the 6 months with his guys. And that's how it worked. So you learned a bit more, but it was still confusing, and it still is to this day. It's been confusing to politicians and so on. But at least now the troubles have ended. So hopefully we're just going to carry on having peace there.
When you talk about the terrorism and the bombing, because this is something that the average American, certainly my age and younger, wasn't even alive for. What were, I guess, what were the rules of engagement when it comes to stopping bombings? What were you looking for? Were you working human sources on the ground? How did you find out, like, this is where we think they might be targeting, either side might be trying to target next?
Yeah, you got intelligence reports, and you had a rules of engagement card, like you do when you went to Iraq or in any situations with Bosnia and so on. There's always rules of engagement. You can't just fire at anyone. You can only fire at somebody if your life or your friend's life was an ultimate threat and there's no other way to stop that. So you would try a rest first of all, and you've got rubber bullets and all the rest of it, but you would only fire in the last resource as a last resource. So long as you can justify using that yellow card, the rules of engagement, then the government would be on your side. Unfortunately, in the past, there has been incidents, about mistakes and that accidents, but that's just part of life, isn't it? But generally, all the people I knew were loyal, doing it correctly. It's just that obviously the people who were the enemy, you didn't know who they were because they were in civilian clothes. But as I said, we got a lot of intelligence. I noticed this was going on from 1969. So the British military, the secret at the time, people like the SAS and other agencies, they were doing lots of undercover operations in civilian clothes and so on, and they were getting in with the community. So we were getting suspects and we were getting informers passing on the information. But because you were just normal infantry, we didn't get the top information, if you know what I mean. We got told who certain terrorists were, and a lot of times you knew who these terrorists were, but you just didn't have all the information to arrest them. So you'd be stopping them and searching them and so on, and keeping an eye on them and doing observation posts on their houses and seeing who's visiting them and all that sort of stuff. So it was like that. So a lot of the times, I do believe we was just we call it a figure 11 target because that's what we used to use on the range. Figure 11s, you're just a walking target. We'll put on the streets just to show a presence, but then we became a target. So that's what it was really. You'd be going out on patrols and doing the vehicle checkpoints and looking for terrorists and doing searches and so on. But just as a normal soldier, that's what your job was, basically, to show a presence. And it's a bit like how it was in Iraq and Afghanistan. Let's face it, there is specific operations where you go on and you know you're going to go on a specific job. But a lot of the times you're just going on routine patrols. And that's what the difference is when we go on to it in the special forces. You don't just do these routine patrols. You know when you're going on a job, it's a specific task because you are at a strategic level. So you aren't just going out boots on the ground. But I've been there, and that's why the good thing was about serving 12 years, first of all, in the normal army and getting up to the rank of a sergeant. I know what it was like to be grown to just a normal soldier on the ground and in command. And sometimes I used to think, right, we've been given this information and it's, it's all pocket and everything. You do believe you're doing a vital job. But then when you get into special forces, you realize you see these guys going on patrol. I used to feel sorry for them because they're just going out getting blown up by these and to me that was the most scariest part when I was a young private because you just don't know what's going to happen. You just always anticipating it. But at least when you go into special forces, you're just going on specific jobs. So you might be with a unit of infantry when they're going out on patrols and maybe going on a couple of patrols with them. But generally you're going on proper jobs, if you understand what I mean. But as for Northern Ireland, yeah, it was we got briefed down information, but obviously there was a lot higher information. So if I was in something like the Special Forces then, and you was over at Ireland, you would be after specific terrorist units. At the time, they called ASUs, Active Service Units. And the SAS took out lots of these units. They did a good job out there, to tell you the truth.
I